Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second lecture of the Western Hemisphere lecture series. Today our guest is Professor Ryszard Piasecki from the University of Łódź, former ambassador to Chile. I personally don't like long introductions. You came here to listen to Professor, not me. But since I have to say something, let me just tell you a short story about how I met Professor. It was 2009. And I was preparing a research project, still being a student. We needed some recommendation letters to get financial support from the University of Warsaw. So we contacted a few institutions, and the first one that responded to us was actually our embassy in Chile. So Ambassador Piasecki sent us a recommendation letter and also invited us to meet him at the embassy while in Chile. So we started in Argentina, and we were supposed to cross the border in Mendoza, but actually there was an avalanche, and the border was closed. And I said to my friends, look, we need to get to Santiago de Chile, even if we have to walk, because we need to keep our appointment with Ambassador. We didn't have to walk. But we took a bus to the south of Argentina to cross the border in Neuquén, only to get back to north of Chile, to get back to Santiago de Chile, and instead of 5 hours, the journey lasted over 30 hours. But it was worth it. I mean, listening to Professor, discussing with Professor was a fantastic experience for us as students. So today I would like to share this experience with you. And with no further delay, please welcome Professor Ryszard Piasecki.
Thank you very much indeed for these nice words. I was also Consul General of Poland to Brazil in Sao Paulo exactly. It was 1993 till 1998. And my experience is fantastic from I would say, Brazil. But I would like to tell you also that in 2004, exactly, we created a summer school, Polish, I would say Poland-Brazil, exactly. And the summer school, we exchange students. In every February, Polish students go to Sao Paulo, around 20 people. And in July, we receive 20 students from Brazil. It's already 15 years of this experience. This was, I would say, the fruit of my, I would say, my mission as Consul General. Then we added more countries. We also have Mexico today, Ecuador, and recently, I have just come back 1 week ago from Nepal, so we also added Nepal. So now we have 4 countries, 4 University of Łódź especially. It's very interesting for students. It's a fascinating, I would say, experience. My experience with South America is, I would say, long term. For the first time, I went to South America in 1989. It was a change because from 1981 till 1988, I was working as assistance technique gouvernementale, because it was in French, in the Congo, in Zaire, Congo-Zaire. And it was a fantastic experience, amazing experience. At that time, the president of the country was Mobutu, dictator. I remember him once we were welcoming him. He was coming from the airport. And there was a group of whites, and so we just said hello to him, and he said hello. And it was funny because he didn't pay for 2 years, because this was an interesting contract that Zaire was not paying for 2 years. So, but one day, finally, we got a quite significant amount of money. But it was really an incredible experience in Africa. But then I changed. At the end of 80s, I started to go to South America. Being all the time professor at the University of Łódź. So this is quite interesting because recently I had anniversary 45 years of work at the University of Łódź and 23 years abroad. We started to talk a bit that now it's not possible, it's not so easy because now it's, I would say universities do not allow so I'd say easily. I was thinking what could be interesting for you, because I imagine that you have distinguished professors here all the time. great experts. I said what I could modestly tell you that could be interesting for you. So I decided to tell you something about shrinking manufacturing industry in the United States and the consequences for, I would say, for American policy, American economic policy, and also consequences for cooperation with Latin America to some extent. Very often we ask questions, is President Trump, I would say, wrong or is right in his criticism of open market? I don't know if he's criticizing. Frankly speaking, very often he says, no, I'm in favor of open market, but suddenly he says, I am not in favor of free market. But this is an American and North American saying, as you remember very well. Free trade is like honesty, brings benefits in the long run. Okay, so it is something historically, you know, it's deeply rooted in the history of America that they are in favor of open, free trade, open market. But what happened in the United States, and this is quite interesting, that we should know that in 2010, the unemployment in the United States reached the level of 10%, 2009, 2010. So we can understand that the people were not very happy with that. But the real unemployment was even higher. There are some experts who say that in 2010, unemployment was almost 20% in some cases. So we can understand why, at that moment, workers in some areas were really unhappy. Then, in 2016, unemployment fell to, official unemployment, to 5%. But still, real unemployment was about 10% because they do not include I would say, temps, the so-called workers who work from time to time, and there are many, I would say, miscalculations. So, but in 2018, now, exactly 1 month ago, the level of unemployment in the United States is very low, 3.9%. So we can say that there's no unemployment because 3.9% is a natural level of unemployment. So it's not really a serious problem, unemployment. But the problem for President Trump is still, I would say, important. Between 1999 and 2009, so during these 10 years, what is a fact? 5.5 million jobs in manufacturing, manufacturing industry, disappeared. This is very important. So this is, we must keep in mind that 1999, 2009, 5.5 million, I would say, jobs in manufacturing industry disappeared. So it's helped us to understand, I would say, the attitude of Trump administration. But why? The reason, there are 7 aspects, there are 7, I would say, reasons for this shrinking manufacturing industry. First of all, internal restructuring. And secondly, 2.4 million jobs due to the trade with China. So due to the trade with China, 2.4 million jobs disappeared, all because they went outside the United States, abroad, and so on. So what is happening now in the United States, you can see on this presentation here, that we see the so-called Rust Belt and Sun Belt, okay? Rust Belt is replaced, or is being replaced by Sun Belt. Rust Belt is Detroit, Pennsylvania, all these, I would say, all these states here, is replaced by Sun Belt is California, New Mexico, Texas, and Florida. The real issue for the United States labor market, for the US labor market, is not the big recession, but the permanent shrinking of the labor market in the manufacturing sector. This is the real problem. Can it be attributed to offshoring or some other trade policy issue? This is a big question, because President Trump, very often he's saying offshoring. This is offshoring because the jobs are exported outside the United States. Where's the real problem? In 1961, this is a very interesting figure, manufacturing jobs in manufacturing industry were 28% of the total employment. 28%, 61. 2018, we have only 7%, okay? 7% of employment is in manufacturing industry. So when we talk about automotive industry, automobile industry, steelworks, and so on, so only 7% today. Biggest fall in jobs happened during these 10 years, 1999, 2009, 5.5 million. So this was the main, I would say, the main problem, because suddenly 5.5 million jobs disappeared. So for working class, it was shocking, okay? It's not only, we could say that USA is not an exception, because there is a general tendency in the world today that manufacturing industry is shrinking. I would say, is slowly. It doesn't mean that manufacturing industry is not producing more. Yes, manufacturing industry is producing more, but employs less and less people. For example, in 1973, in Germany, manufacturing industry employed 37%. 37% of working people were in manufacturing industry in Germany. In Sweden, 28%. In the Netherlands, 25%. In the USA, it was 23%. Today, in Germany, we have 25% still. So Germany still is, manufacturing industry is still very important. Sweden, 12%. Netherlands, 12%. And USA, between 7 and 8%. So we can say that generally, manufacturing's share of total employment falls as the economy grows wealthier. This is a general tendency in economics. We say very often, we refer very often to famous economist Lewis. He was saying always that there is a turning point is around between $5,000 per capita to $10,000 per capita. When the country reaches this level, this is I would say you turn, I would say, and this means that manufacturing industry is starting to shrink. I mean the participation of workers in manufacturing industry. Of course, there is another problem that is concerning, for example, us, Poland. There appears another problem, the so-called middle income trap, but this is another topic that we can talk in, I would say, next opportunity, next occasion. At the same time, we must remember that from 80s, exactly 85, it is, I would say this is probably the best date of the beginning of globalization in the world, globalization. Globalization, it's very, in my opinion, we can define globalization in a very easy way. What does it mean, globalization? Globalization is just liberalization and internet, okay? Globalization happened, free trade mainly, happened also in 19th century. Colonial globalization, when the Great Britain was, I would say, the most important country in the world in 19th century. But there was no internet at that time, okay? So internet today helps, I would say, a lot, because thanks to internet, we can conclude contracts, we can sign contracts in real time, okay? This is very important and very cheap, okay, in a very cheap way. You should remember that in 1936, 1 minute of communication, of telephone communication from Great Britain, from the United Kingdom to the United States, was in today's dollars was $50. $50, 1 minute of communication. So when we look at today's, I would say, internet opportunities, possibilities, it's fantastic because we can get it. So this is, globalization is just liberalization and internet. But very often, Trump administration and other people, they blame globalization and offshoring for loss of American manufacturing jobs. And they say that this is the main reason. But this is a major simplification, a major simplification. To understand the unemployment issue, one must learn about the impact of a mix of structural changes in the US economy, which have been accelerated by the US policy of open economy and international competition. Joseph Schumpeter, very famous, I would say, economist, famous of Austrian origin, but living in the United States, argued that dynamic capitalism must cut off rotten branches and make a space for the new one to grow. For example, this has happened in Poland, for example, in Łódź, when I come from. Textile industry was completely destroyed, I would say. This is a very interesting thing that happened in Łódź, because textile industry was too expensive. And when competition came from China and Turkey, the Łódź textile industry immediately, I would say, collapsed. So quite simple, quite, I would say, similar phenomenon is happening in the United States. In this sense, unemployment is a cost of moving to service-based economy in US. We can see it here very easily here, yes, on this graph, that Rust Belt, yes, that this is replaced by Sun Belt. But what does it mean, Sun Belt? It's mainly services, mainly services. We also should keep in mind that today in the US economy, but not only US, but mainly US, services employ 70%. Services employ 70% of people, okay, of employed people. So students who go now to the American and the USA university, they mostly understand that they have to work, or will have to work, in services and not in manufacturing industry. So every recession, we should remember that every recession brings more labor-saving technology, more or less about 10% or more. Why? Because employers prefer machines to people, okay? They prefer machines to people. This was quite obvious and natural that this industry, I would say, this restructuring of American industry started to happen, and it happened, reality. Just to give you some interesting figures, between 1945 and 1970, in the USA, wages doubled, 100%. This was the real wages. 1973 till 1990, wage growth slowed down very significantly. And since 2000, the wages are stagnant. The wages in the United States, real wages, are stagnant. So again, another, I would say, explanation why American working class was not happy and was voting in favor of President Trump. Because they simply feel, I would say, lost a bit in the new situation. Today, low-skilled US manufacturing jobs pay more or less $19 per hour. And top-end manufacturing jobs in China pay between $3 and $5 per hour. So we understand why, apart from, I would say, structural changes, we have a lot of industries, companies going to China. Because, as you can imagine, the cost of labor is much, much lower. But of course, we can now tell you, I would say, it's quite obvious that if China continues to become richer and richer, the industries will come back. We do not know. If now it's $5 more or less per hour in China, maybe if they reach $10, it will be a moment when industries will be coming back to, I would say, to the United States. What should be normally, what is normally in economics, how do we say, what should normally happen? A developed capital abundant country like the US, Switzerland, Japan should make and export capital intensive goods and technology goods. This is the way how to replace this shrinking, I would say, relatively simple manufacturing industry. But it's not always very easy. It's not always possible. But here is the problem. Making capital-intensive goods does not require many skilled workers. So both low-skilled and some of the skilled workers will not find jobs. Today, there is no problem with 3.8% unemployment in the USA. It's a natural level, as I told you. The pressure on US labor comes today from 3 sides. And this is, I don't know if President Trump, administration of President Trump understands clearly the problem. First of all, we have the Schumpeterian creative destruction. All the industries, Ohio, Detroit, Pennsylvania, that are replaced by these new industries, okay? Secondly, switching from manufacturing to services. As I told you, 70% people mostly, this is mostly financial, so they mostly go to services. And number 3, and this is what Trump, I would say, is blaming, especially, is offshoring and outsourcing, making things for less abroad or using global supply chain. The US workers are losing jobs to the China because, to the Chinese, because Chinese workers have also comparative advantage over US workers. They are not only cheaper, but because they are producing more in the unit of work time they are paid for. What's the conclusion? US workers should produce more in the unit paid time, so productivity must grow. They should, but they do not want. They should accept lower salaries, or lower wages, but they are not happy to accept lower wages. And then make the US workers produce something else in which they have comparative advantage. This requires education, I would say, of workers that is expensive. Of course, students, American students, they understand the problem. But of course, it's expensive. Harvard University, it's at least $50,000. Nanotechnology, for example, different disciplines, $50,000 a year. So to some American students, it's a problem. Of course, to a lot of them. The problem is that, and this is a very serious problem, is I would say that in America, it has changed significantly the situation from the point of view of, I would say, social equality. Just to give you the example, the profits of corporations at this time also, and today are rising all the time. Capital gets concentrated in 0.1% of the population. It is very significant change compared to 1965, so more or less 50 years ago. In 1965, on average, an American CEO, manager, I would say, director, earned 20 times what a worker did. In 2016, the number was 300 times higher. So we see also the problem of the concentration of capital and, of course, growing inequalities that are mainly, I would say, caused by also globalization. But coming back to the problem with this, for example, removing and bringing back offshore production from China to the United States. You probably know about it, that a simple iPhone produced in the United States instead of China would cost 3 times higher, okay? 3 times. $2,000 instead of $700. Who benefited in the United States from this globalization and from this offshoring and outsourcing? Mainly customers. So if administration of Trump is going to help workers of steel works from, for example, Detroit, they must know, of course, and they know about it, that it will cause, I would say, a serious damage to American customers. There was some calculation, interesting calculation, how much will cost Louis jeans today if really the production is brought back to the United States. So, in other words, we can say that this was a quite significant problem, and it is a serious problem. When we analyze the situation, we have the impression that the administration of Trump is talking only about one side of things, okay? Of unhappiness of workers in the Detroit area, okay? But not the whole story. It means that why American customers are really, I would say, happier. Some figures, 2018, we can say that the USA today has quite good economy. This 2.9 economic growth, inflation 2.5, for example. I would also like to add something about South America, because Dr. Schneff asked me to say something about South America in this context. It's important to understand that what is happening now in the United States, this rhetoric more or less against free trade, or that some people have impression, this makes, I would say, people, I'd say, of South America very confused. We should know that Mercosur was founded in 1991 through the famous Asunción Treaty, and then was finalized by Oro Preto Protocol 1994 that attributed international legal personality to Mercosur. But Mercosur was created mainly to help these South American countries, you know, to transform their economies. It was quite similar like in Poland. And they introduced I would say on a large scale, the Washington Consensus. It was very famous. The first country that introduced Washington Consensus was, which country, you know? Which country in South America introduced Washington Consensus? The first country, Bolivia. Jeffrey Sachs, very famous in Poland. He came to Bolivia. Bolivia in 1985 had 19,000% of inflation. After 1.5 years of adjustment program, you know, the inflation fell to 5%. But at the same time, the economic growth completely stopped at the same time. So it's interesting to see some films, documentary from Bolivia. What was the reaction of population to I would say, very famous adjustment program? Very unhappy. They were really unhappy people. But of course, they were told that open economy, free trade is very important for them. The best pupil of South American countries was Chile. They say that famous Chicago boys, they were the first. And Pinochet was, we can say that Pinochet was, he introduced this neoliberal model to Chile. Very often we do not know about it, that he followed another example of an interesting country that it was not his invention so much, but first of all, he sent some experts to Indonesia. Because Indonesia started after Sukarno. With Suharto, they started to transform the economy according to neoliberal model. So for these South American countries was very important, this transformation according to this open economy model, free trade. Mercosur was created, in fact, for that. The USA attitude towards Mercosur was confused for, I would say, a long time. In fact, unofficially, they criticize Mercosur because they say, or they used to say, that Mercosur was against free trade, okay? Against free trade. But today, when Mercosur, I would say, countries, they know what is happening in North America, they also become confused in which way they should go. And I could say that USA views the bloc, Mercosur, as an obstacle to the expansion of their trade in Latin America. Venezuela rejected the pro-American famous free trade agreement in the American FTAA in 2005. Mercosur, in a few words. Mercosur in countries like Brazil, that I know particularly well. In Chile, Chile is just associate member. Argentina, citizens, they do not feel Mercosur. When you ask people about Mercosur, they say, we do not know Mercosur. On the contrary, we appreciate the European Union very often. I had this opportunity when I talked to them. Yes, European Union is an example of a good integration grouping, okay? But Mercosur, they are not very happy. Another story is NAFTA. Yes, NAFTA, as you know, NAFTA signed in 1994. Canada, Mexico, and the USA has succeeded, to some opinions, in advancing economies, integration in North America. Productivity increased in 3 countries, but of course, you know what happened I would say, with NAFTA agreement. What is interesting is to know something about what happened now. Just a few days ago, we know that it was finally accepted, this UMCA. There are some changes. There are some changes. I would like to tell you about some changes of USMCA agreement that should be approved by parliaments. But what is interesting is to know that country of origin rules under the New Deal, cars or trucks must have 75% of their components manufactured in Mexico, the US, or Canada. This is, this is this reaction to this, offshoring problems and problems connected to outsourcing as well. To qualify for zero tariffs, this must be at least 75% of their components manufactured in Mexico and US or Canada. This is a substantial increase from 62.5% in the original NAFTA. The goal is to boost auto parts manufacturing in North America by forcing car companies to use parts made here versus cheaper parts from Asia. This will probably increase the cost of cars, it's very probable, and trucks, and it might make it harder for Mexico to make or sell certain smaller cars here in the USA. Labor provisions. The most striking difference from NAFTA involves protections for workers in all 3 countries. The new agreement calls for 40 to 45% of automobile content to be made by workers, and listen, who earn at least $16 an hour, okay, by 2023. In the US, as I told you, the minimum is 19. This provision specifically targets Mexico and is meant to bring wages there to US and Canadian standards. It will not be easy, of course. That's good for Mexican workers, but that's not the only motivation behind it. The Trump administration hopes that if Mexico no longer pays its workers a lot less than in the USA or Canada do, companies will no longer have a reason to move their factories to Mexico and out of the USA as well, thus keeping manufacturing jobs in the US and Canada. In addition, Mexico has agreed to pass laws giving workers the right to real union representation. It's also interesting. To extend labor productions to migrant workers who are often from Central America, and to protect women from discrimination. These were decisions made, I would say, recently. There is also there are also some other things interesting. Intellectual property and digital trade. This is a win for the United States. The new agreement extends the terms of copyright from 50 years to years beyond the life of the author to 70 years now in USMCA. Beyond the life of the author, it also offers increased protections for biologics, certain types of drugs from 8 years to 10 years, which basically extends the period that a drug can be protected from generic competition. You know, this is a very serious problem, yes, this, I would say, production of generics. This was a serious problem. 10 years ago, you can listen to Joseph Stiglitz on TED lectures, how he was criticizing because the United States companies, especially our pharmaceutical companies, they didn't want to agree to the production of generics against AIDS, HIV, because the cost of this, they were selling HIV drugs in the United States for more or less $1,500 a month. Brazil, India, and South Africa, they were ready to produce these products for $50, just $50. But American companies were saying, no, no, we cannot accept it because the cost of producing one drug against HIV is something like $1 billion. So if we sell for $50, it doesn't make sense. So it was a serious, I would say, fight. They agreed, as you know, but now in these countries in generic, that produce generic drugs against HIV, they have different color. Yeah, so you cannot travel with these drugs, I would say, and you cannot enter the United States because you can be arrested. What else can we say is that what happened to Canada is also interesting. Canada preserved a special trade dispute mechanism. One of Canada's red lines was the preservation of NAFTA's Chapter 19, which set up an independent mechanism to resolve special trade disputes between the countries, rather than trying to fight it out in domestic courts. Canada saw Chapter 19 as a way to defend against protectionist trade policies by the US and prevailed in this goal. Canada lost a bit. Canada lost a bit in this sense that US farmers get more access to the Canadian dairy market. This has been a pet issue for Trump and is thus considered a win for the United States and probably also a win for Canadian consumers. So we can see that some important changes happened, but the problem in the United States now and in both Americas is now what next with the intellectual concept of free trade. The intellectual concept of free trade came from the United States. The United States is, I would say, is a father, I would say, mother, whatever, of this idea that free trade is the best for economic development. In South America today, in many countries, we talk more and more about post-neoliberal approach. Post-neoliberal approach. More and more countries, especially in Brazil, but not only, they think that pure market does not solve the problem. That free market is not the unique solution, the best solution. That there should be a mixture of good, I would say, state governance as well. So again, we see the challenge, a very serious challenge in the United States, but also in South America. South America, which is, I would say, traditionally much, much more poorer. I remember, of course, the books of Singer, who wrote about 1900, when people were just hesitating where they should go. Should we go to emigrate? Should we go for immigration to Argentina? Or should we go to New York? Should we go to Buenos Aires or should we go to New York? Very often they didn't know. Both the countries seemed to them very interesting, but no more. Argentina is the example, you know, of a very serious collapse of the economy. And this is very interesting because culturally, the country is composed of whites, Spaniards and Italians. What is the main conclusion, you know, from this? That the most important for development in every country are institutions. Institutions Means the rules of behavior. The rules, I would say, for example, market is an institution. Property rights, corruption. The more corruption you have in a given country, the less chances, opportunities for development. The more nepotism we have, the less chances for development you have. So this is, today, it's an obvious conclusion. United States has much better institutions. Much, much better institutions. So United States still keeps the superiority in development. But the question is open now, what will happen after Trump administration? I think that they will have to come back to this idea of free trade. But I don't want to blame absolutely Trump administration. They are right a bit, yeah, when they say that offshoring is a problem to some extent. But the problem is, of course, you know, is much more complicated, as I tried to explain you. This is the structural changes in the US economy, but not only in the US, but also in the world economy. And just to finish, I strongly recommend you to read a very good book of a Singapore professor, Mahbubani. Recently, he published his book where he says that domination of the Western civilization is coming to the end. Even today, the production of Asian countries is much, much bigger than, I would say, of G7. And he says there's nothing new, because till 1750, India, especially China and India, were dominating the world. But today, this is the same thing. China is coming back with its production, it's producing more and more. Why he explains it happened? He says that it happened because of Machiavelli, okay? That intellectually, that they understood Machiavelli from a positive side. What does it mean? That China and other countries, like India as well, they started to introduce much more pragmatic solutions, practical solutions, than idealistic and dogmatic. And according to Mahbubani, this process is unstoppable. And the West, in the United States as well, should be prepared for this new change of roles on the world scene, that there will be Asian countries again dominating. So I strongly invite you to read this book, not a very big one, but it's a very fascinating book. Thank you. It's Has the West Lost It? By the way, I have it here, so enjoy for the photocopy. So thank you very much, and I invite you for questions. Thank you.
So it seems now we have Asian lion and Asian fox instead of dragon, isn't it? Okay, if there are any questions, please, or comments?
So I was thinking, because it is stated in many, many researchers say that Americans do not travel as much as they did before, from one state to the other. But you say that they would have to move from those northern states to those southern states.
No, I don't say that. Sorry. What I say that there is industries are replaced here, because, you know, these workers from steelworks in Detroit, they will not go there. They are too old. They are not prepared, you know, to work in. I don't know if I can show you this. I would like to show you just a moment. Oh yes, for example, you see the difference. Yeah, this is Google. Yeah, in California, in Silicon Valley, but this is Detroit. I took these photos personally, pictures. Yeah, you see, this is all the industry, and again, Silicon Valley. We see the difference. Again, Detroit. This is quite so. This Rust Belt. So what I was saying is that industries are replaced. I don't know if workers, I don't think so. If they are 35, 40 years old, if they can go. This is the problem of Trump. Because he says, maybe I understand there is Sunbelt, but what to do with these people who are living in Detroit, who are 40 years old, okay? The same thing like our miners in Poland, in Silesia. What to do with them? So this is the problem. But they're Sunbelt, new people, new education, young, this is generation, the whole generation. They cannot move, no, because maybe some of them, maybe young students. Just to give you an example, this is not the same. A friend of mine was, when I was Consul General of Poland in Brazil, he was Vice Consul General of the United States. When he was young, he was a pilot in Mediterranean on American air carrier. And he made 300 landings and takeoffs in the Mediterranean. He was 22 years old. And then America changed the type of the aircraft. And he said, I was finished. I could not continue my service on the aircraft because I was unable to adapt to the new aircraft. Do you imagine something like that? So they had to bring young pilots again who were I would say, who were training from the very beginning. So this is the same thing. You cannot just say, take a worker from Detroit and put in the Silicon Valley. It's impossible. So this is the social problem of the United States. Yeah? How to solve the problem.
So I have a follow-up question. It's that, on one hand, you've got raising tuition prices in the United States, so that it's harder and harder to get an education. And the other thing is that it's something that you cannot really buy. It's that certain job you can become educated, but I think that there is a problem of IQ. There are more and more jobs when you have to have high IQ, and people don't really know how to raise people's IQ. So there is this. If there's going to be less and less jobs in the United States that involve manual labor and stuff like that, then there's going to be a simple class difference between people with higher IQ and who are able to get tuition and those who simply can't go anywhere. And of course, it also stands against many of traditional American values when it comes to equality.
Of course, yes, you're right. I agree. So this is the problem, social problem in the United States, very serious problem, and this explains why Trump, for some people, he's right from his opinions are because he's thinking how he can solve the problem, because of course they are losing competition with China. It's obvious. So theoretically, everybody is right because globalization brings positive effects, okay? It's very good for customers, for consumers, American consumers. They pay $700 for an iPhone instead of $2,000. But we have very serious social problems connected with this, I would say, shift of industries, and shift of offshoring, and so on. So it explains to some extent why Trump is doing like that. And I repeat.
Professor, I enjoyed your lecture thoroughly. However, I feel I must disagree with you at a certain point where it comes to basically why certain goods or services increase in innovation through innovation and through basically I would describe it as variety of goods and services. I would say that China slowly, its market, you seem very optimistic about Chinese market. However, me having lived there for 2 years before coming here to Poland, I would say that China is slowly moving in from the perspective of the flying goose model that Japan adopted during the 1960s and 70s in order to move from textiles to industry and from industry to high tech. I would believe that China is slowly following the same path where they go from a very industry-heavy country, slowly from textiles. I come from a textile family too. But they move from this kind of family into a more consumer society where they are more focused on services. And
No, yes, of course. Yeah.
so my question is, in the end, do you believe it is still safe to assume that China would become the global, you could say, superpower when the trend is that they're following the same footsteps that the United States is following?
You know, this is a very good question, and I was in China last year, 1.5 years ago, and I was teaching at the Zhengzhou University for 1 month. It was an amazing experience with them because they say that they have now open economy, okay, more or less. It's not very open economy, as you know. This is Beijing consensus and not Washington consensus. China has semi-market, I would say, instruments. Semi-market. For example, it is allowed in China to buy an apartment. Do you know about it? You can buy. If you have money, yes. But the problem is that you buy it for 70 years. Yes, it's renting, not buying. Nobody knows what will happen after 70 years, okay? But the rule is 70 years, you are owner of the... so one thing, okay? Second thing is that they have still Communist Party, you know, power. When I came, I asked authorities, can I talk about everything? They say, yes, but... one thing not. Human rights. Please don't touch the topic of human rights. You can talk about market economy, you can talk about everything, but not human rights. So this is, when you compare it with India, now India, maybe you know, that has higher economic growth, rate of economic growth than China. India now has 7.5. No, this is 2 weeks ago, last, I would say, last information. China 6.5, but still very high. We do not, but India is democratic country, okay? More or less, but it is democratic country. While China has a communist power, we do not know what will be the outcome of this two, you know. When I talked confidentially with some of my assistants and so on in China, and I asked them, what do you think? Will China break one day, and will communist power give up? They say no. Because if communist power gives the power, I would say, and they create democracy, the country will break down immediately. Tibet, northern part, Muslim part of China, they will immediately break down. So we do not know this factor, communist power, how long it will last. But I think that it is a serious, I would say, partner today. They are very serious, you know. They have 10,000 or 12,000 of TGV, I would say, train, high-speed train, you know, in China. Very serious achievements. Skyscrapers. You know, I don't have to tell you because you visited China recently, yes? And they really also changed their ecological policy. You will not see in China, you know, now in cities of China, you will not see, you see only electrical engines, bicycles, bikes, everything is, even rickshaws are electrical.
They banned motorcycles in Guangzhou a few years back.
Yeah, so
within city limits.
So it is. I can't tell you because I don't pretend to know that what will happen with China, but it's a serious. I would say it's a serious player. It's a serious actor, and it could be. I don't know. It could be dangerous, but this is really very strong economy. This is still poor country. This is not yet very rich country. The country has only $8,000 per capita, but much more than India. India has around $1,600 per capita of growth, okay, economic growth. But it is a serious. A lot of you remember here, you know, 70s, what was happening in Mao Zedong, there were hundreds of millions of people dying of hunger almost, okay, in this country, but everything disappeared. At which university we have hundreds of Chinese students coming every year. So it has changed, really, and the country is different, and I would not forget about China. China is really a serious player. So I understand that Trump is a bit afraid of. I don't know which way it will go, but.
May I ask one more question?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
My last question is concerning more the US rather than China. The only way, from my experience and my knowledge, that a country can increase its basically economic worth, its GDP, it's through the innovation and through the I don't know how to describe it, like like diversification of its goods and services, and this thus consequentially creates a competition within the market. And as I would agree with you, and I believe you would too, that competition is a good thing within a free market, that it incentivizes people to create better things, people to make better products, make better services. And so although the US is 70% services oriented, would it still, I would say my standpoint is that I do not blame Trump for not being so forgetful of the industry area of the United States, because the United States is very, very rich within its resources. And in order to also kind of, you could say, work with the natural resources that the United States has, there needs to be a certain structure in order to manipulate those resources and make it into capital. And so do you believe that Trump's attempt to incentivize the United States into also using its own resources is blameless?
You know, coming back, you're absolutely right that free market without competition is not working. You know, the problem is that a free market must have competition. And the state is responsible for that, because the state should really create legal framework for good functioning of the market. This is the main problem. Look at countries like Ukraine, Russia. They privatized, okay, theoretically a lot of things. But did they really reach a serious improvement of the quality of life? Some people, yes, but not everybody, because in these countries, I would say in these countries, state monopoly was replaced by private monopoly. It's a very dangerous thing. Monopoly is a dangerous thing. So competition is absolutely basic. But who should help competition? The state. The state, with its legal institutions, must help to create a good framework for the competition to work. If you do not have this, you have to look at the United States. They have really, legally speaking, very good legal framework for that. They have good institutions. So this is very, very important, I would say, from this point of view, that without competition, you have no, I would say, good economic growth. And at a certain point, you must have innovation, technological innovation, especially in the case in our countries like we are, Poland, because we are in the middle income trap. So we should develop our technological capabilities, because if we do not do this, we shall not really become really developed countries. So there is a lot of interesting things on this topic, yes, and we could discuss, you know, for a long time.
This is monopoly, as you can see. No competition, just monopolies.
I am very much impressed by these questions, because they are really very good questions. Thank you very much for them. But I see that you work very hard here, yes. And I am also teaching in CIFA, it's a Centre International Formation Européenne, in Nice, France, and Berlin, Germany. We have international groups. So by the way, if you one day you finish your studies here, you can continue your postgraduate studies in one of these anglophone, I would say, sections of our European education. So by the way, if we stay in contact, I can. I am Secretary General of this institution, and it's quite interesting. We have also an American branch also in this. No, okay, thank you very much for all. Yeah. Ah, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to bother you too long, but I wanted to ask you because we agreed upon the competition. Trump believes that China is cheating in this competition by the way the economy works and regarding to its central banks and the currency manipulation that China is using with its system. Since China's using China's currency is the yuan, as you know, but the Communist Party decides basically through their own policies what should be the value. And the thing is that the reason China is primarily really, really rich is because it exported more than it imported, and it didn't adjust itself. It didn't adjust their currency according to how it should be in the global standard through the dollar, because most of the transactions made through central banks in the whole world are made through dollars. They did not adjust their currency according to the number of transactions, meaning which are relative to the amount of goods and products they exported. And would you say that this is basically a kind of form of cheating that China is doing, and that's why Trump's claim is sort of legitimate when he's talking about China and its influence in the global market?
Now, of course, they are cheating, of course, because this is widespread what they are doing. But they, foreign currency is a different problem because they simply did not allow full liberalization, financial liberalization. It's another story, okay? But India the same. India also controls the rate of exchange. But this is not here, okay, this is the policy of the country. They did not allow full, I would say, financial freedom, okay? And this is their policy. But they are cheating everything, they are cheating especially with patents, with technology. They are stealing technology from, and this is proven. Here, Trump is right, because they produce, the products they are producing in their country, they steal technology immediately. Yeah. So this is, but very often they say that Japan was doing very similar things when they were, I would say, 30, 40 years ago, when they were on the way of their, I would say, takeoff, economic takeoff. But here, Trump is certainly right. It's proven. There's a lot of evidence, a lot of, I would say, interesting documents on the fact that they copy illegally thousands of innovations, and this is the problem, of course, because they have today, with their own iPhones, their own cars. Yeah, I was very much impressed in China to see their own Chinese cars, and in Poland we hesitate. Should we buy a Chinese car? But they are very good in China. They circulate everywhere. So it's a different optic. It is a different option. After my 1 month in China, I am looking at China differently now. I become really, I would say, really aware of the potential of China, and it is a serious potential. It's like Taiwan, Taiwan that benefited a lot from one of the dragons. But now China is following this way. And 10 years to come, 20 years to come, you will probably remember, maybe, our meeting today. China can become really very powerful country. I'm afraid so.
I just have a quick question. What's your opinion about the recent agreement between Trump and Xi Jinping?
Yes, there is an agreement, of course. They made an agreement, but I don't believe in this agreement. Okay, I think that 3-4 months later, next year maybe, in not so many months to come, the situation will change, because you see different interests. Because China is still very much interested in they have to go this way. they have to copy, I would say, American technology. They know at the same time that if really the United States introduces, these tariffs, high tariffs, it will be devastating for the trade. So it's tactical, probably it's tactical. But in the long run, I don't think so that this will really be, a very long-term, I would say, peaceful agreement. However, it's interesting that they came to this, I would say, to this agreement, that they do this agreement. But I don't believe that in the long run, let's say 6 months or more months to come, it will change. We have strategically, I'd say, fundamental differences of interests. Okay, and now it's a bit too late, because now it's a bit too late to change China, I would say, path of development. They followed, they have acquired a lot of American technologies, not only American technologies, but you should remember that if America withdraws, you have European Union investments, other countries, Japanese investments. So they will certainly continue, I don't want to say to steal, but to benefit from foreign technologies as long as they can. On the other hand, they say today they are ecologically, the people who deal with I would say, environmental problems, they are very much astonished to see that China is changing rapidly in a positive way. In this, I would say, ecological, environmental, so they learn a lot. But the country, they do not have democracy, and they will not have democracy for 10 years to come. So Communist Party can do anything they want. But it's a fascinating, amazing topic, and maybe you should invite ambassador of China, but he will say nothing. Ambassador will say nothing. No, he cannot, because he will be immediately reprimanded by. Okay, thank you very much.
Right, so it seems we have dragons of global economy in Asia, we have eagles in the United States, and Latin America struggling to be rather a condor than a llama of global economy. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor, for an interesting lecture. Thank you very much to our staff. Well, first of all, to Professor Koch, the Director of American Studies Center, for being with us, and also Professors, Professor Wilczyński, Professor Dębicz, who are present here, and obviously to all our students and everyone interested in what's happening in the global economy, in the tendencies also within the Western Hemisphere. That is the scope of our
But we should
main
also see,
interest.
by the way, we should also see in Brazil, Bolsonaro with his policy, what will happen in Brazilian economics and politics. I hope so that he will change, because what he was saying till today was also very dangerous, yes, from the point of view of democracy. But we didn't have enough time for Brazil.
I believe,
another topic.
Yeah, we have a very interesting situation right now with two models, one in Mexico that finally became leftist after 70, well, almost 80 actually years, and Brazil that turned the other way. So it's going to be even more interesting, and well, thank you for today. So we keep in touch, so maybe we can go back to a discussion on the economies in the Western Hemisphere. Thank you for today.